philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wasn't too keen on starting the day, but boredom would eventually crowbar her out of bed. And so we collect and manage, maybe ritualistically, situations and things. They become ours, and so the world becomes more approachable. I think it also applies to our morning routines. The set of objects and actions and situations that we interact with on a daily basis, and in such a way that we feel a strong sense of ownership over them. This, I think, is why it's interesting.
Hello there, this is Editing Rachel. I'm afraid that a big chunk of the footage for this video is out of focus. I was too far away from the camera to see that, and it's very, very frustrating that I can't reshoot this because it was an unscripted video, so all the stuff I chatted about would just be lost. I'm really sorry, guys. I've tried to overlay it with as much B-roll as possible so you're not having to constantly look at it, but it does clear up later on in the video, so yeah. Please bear with me, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. And also, yes, my smoke alarm is still beeping. Unfortunately, you can hear it in this video. I didn't realise that you could still hear it even though I was in the other room. I don't even hear it anymore. I'm working with my landlord to get it fixed. Please stop asking me about it. I'm doing my best. I live in a tenement, so my ceilings are like 15 feet high, and there's just no way that I can deal with it myself. I'm working on it, but yeah, I'm sorry if that's annoying as well. I was a barista for many years, which, if you haven't been around on my channel for quite a long time, you maybe didn't know. But yeah, I was a specialty barista. My first job when I was 15 was in a cafe, and then when I first moved for uni, I had to leave that job because I was moving cities. I didn't get another job until later through university, and I worked a bit of retail during university and after. And then, when I graduated, all I wanted to do was write. I studied philosophy and I knew that I didn't want to go any further with that, so I decided to just try and get any kind of job that could give me some kind of baseline to pay the bills, and something hopefully that would let me dedicate all of my energy that was left over to writing. So I went back to hospitality, and I over the next few years worked in a bunch of different cafes. I started out in this little place that was under like the central station like bridge, and it was this little kind of Mediterranean kind of greasy spoon place. The coffee was absolutely terrible, but I got to grips with hospitality again after not having done it for years basically. And from there I worked in a bunch of different cafes, and I kind of worked my way up through the terrible coffee to the good coffee, and eventually became a specialty barista, so real serious coffee science stuff. I ended up eventually working with different coffee roasters. I helped run, or I worked during the Glasgow Coffee Festival. I actually once made espresso for the judges of the UK Barista Championships, not because I was competing, but because they needed to calibrate their palates before judging the contest, and I made the espresso that they used to do that, which was terrifying. All of that is to say, I worked in a lot of different cafes with a lot of different systems. Some places were super organised and some places not so much. A lot of the smaller, more independent places can tend to be a little bit chaotic. The stuff that you actually are using isn't very well organised, or you're running out of things all the time. And I basically stopped jumping from place to place when I got a job at a place called Avenue Coffee. I got a job at a place called Avenue Coffee, which was my first specialty coffee job, and for a while, I really loved it there because the main difference from the places that I'd been so far was that their system was not flawless, but it covered everything. The way that they worked there was so systematized that it actually made things so much easier. Every single thing that you needed to use for your job had a place. Everything was divided into different specialties for different jobs. It basically ran more like a restaurant than a cafe. A lot of cafe jobs, you're a barista, apparently, but you kind of do everything. You will make food, you'll make sandwiches, you'll do dishes, you'll make the coffee, you'll take it to people, you'll be putting things through the till, you'll be taking orders, you will be, washing up at the end of the day, cleaning everything, maybe even doing the cash up. It's a very jack of all trades kind of job when you work in, like I did, these small independent cafes. And even in the larger chains, I did a little bit of work with Costa, and I'm sure that, Cafe Nero and Starbucks and stuff like that are quite similar, where yes, you're a barista, I guess, first and foremost, but the range of things that you have to do is kind of huge. And what I loved about working at Avenue, back when I did actually enjoy working there, the shine did come off and it did eventually leave. But the thing I loved about working at Avenue was, as a barista, you had a finite set of jobs. You were responsible for making all the coffee, and you would do dishes, and you would sometimes jump on the floor to help whoever was serving on the floor. But you had actual waiting staff, and you had a chef. So the chef would be making all the food, or the food person, as we called them, would be making all the food. The floor staff would be taking all the orders and bringing in dishes and just serving everyone on the floor. And your responsibility was the orders come in, make the coffee, and send it out with the floor person. Everything that you had to do had a rhythm to it. It had its own place. Every ingredient that you might need to use, obviously coffee beans, water, hot water, tea bags, but we did do other specialty things as well, like matcha lattes and turmeric lattes and beetroot lattes, and all of the ingredients for those had their own place in your own fridge. And so once you learned the system, which did take some time, it did take, a couple of weeks of being oh God, where is that thing? Are you doing things slightly wrong? And other baristas kind of pulling you up on it and being nope, this is the system, bring you back to the system. Once you learned the system, you could get into a flow. And you could start to run things kind of on autopilot. Okay, we're folding now. The system at Avenue was incredibly robust, and if there were things which changed, new tasks which kind of arrived, we were serving new drinks or something had to change, people were always kind of workshopping the system. So we had a head barista, but the other baristas would be hey, this part of the system doesn't seem to be working great, maybe we should try this instead. Maybe we should try moving the saucers over here instead, because that makes it easier to reach them when you've got the fridge open and stuff like that. And so you could make suggestions. You couldn't just change the system as just your baseline barista, but you could go to the head barista and be hey, I think this would actually work better, and so maybe we should all start doing it like that. Now, there are a lot of things about being a barista that I did not enjoy and that I didn't like, or that were really stressful. Some of the working conditions and stuff in hospitality, here in the UK at least, can be absolutely terrible. But there was one thing I liked, or there were times that I liked, where obviously there's always an ebb and flow of how busy the place would be, how much coffee you were expected to make, and how difficult or how busy the shift would be. And obviously there were times where, it didn't feel where there were, very few orders and things would feel slow and maybe a bit boring. There were times where you were absolutely at capacity and you were this is too busy for me to handle. And one of the things I really loved about the system is that when you're working within a system like that and you've got and you're one person, it's very easy to see like what your capacity is. So like if you're getting orders in too fast to actually make them in a decent time, and you're like, I am working the system and this is the fastest that any human could possibly do this, then I know that it's too busy for me to handle by myself, and I'm not gonna beat myself up about the fact that I'm like not some kind of superhuman. And you could be like, we need another barista on when it's this busy, because as one person I'm absolutely at capacity. This is the fastest that you can possibly make coffee with this like, you know, very robust kind of mechanical system that we have set out for it. Why was I saying that? So there were quiet times and there were busy times, but there would be this kind of sweet spot where it would be busy enough to keep you going, but not so busy that you were overwhelmed. And even sometimes when you were overwhelmed, there would be days where you would just get into flow. And I can't describe it any other way, where you know the system so well, the muscle memory is there, you know, you're pulling a shot and your hand is already reaching for the cup, and then when that hand is left, the other hand is already reaching for the saucer, and you just don't have to think about it anymore because you've done this so many times in the same order, in the exact same way, that it's like autopilot, and it felt fucking amazing. It really, when you could get into that state where you're just kind of flowing and things are going right, and you know nothing's run out and there aren't any like catastrophes, and the amount of orders coming in was just kind of steady, where you get into this flow and it would feel like dancing or like flying or something like that, where you were just completely present with what you were doing. And I think I would describe that as creative flow, but I understand why maybe people wouldn't, because I think when we use the word creative, people think of just the arts, you know, so things like visual art or writing. But I think I've kind of been expanding my idea of what I consider to be creative. And I think this is actually it's actually coming from the fact that I've been reading Big Magic recently, which is that like when you literally break it down, obviously, like you take the word at its like face value meaning, to be creative is to create something, anything. And creating coffee is still, creating a cup of coffee is still creating. Yeah, when I think about that like flow that you could get into as a barista with the support of that, like, you know, a system which would allow that to me is a form of creative flow. It's like a physical creative flow rather than more like a mental creative thing. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, that experience of being able to work within a system which reduced friction and decision making in such an effective way, that was the first time I'd ever experienced that. And it makes me think, and if I hadn't worked at a place which was so organized and kind of almost so regimented in that way, like I'm like, I can't think of another way that I would have got that experience, and kind of like, I can't think of another time in my life or, you know, thing that I've done in my life which has shown me how systematizing something to what might seem from the outside like an absolutely absurd degree can be so good. Like be so good for not just your productivity but your mindset as you're doing things, and can make work feel easier. I worked at Avenue Coffee. It was the longest coffee job I ever had, and I worked there for years, and there were ups and downs. I eventually did leave, obviously. It's no longer there now. Yeah, my feelings about that place and the work that I did there, my job there, and you know, all the people that I worked with and stuff, like, are complicated and bittersweet. But in some ways I'm incredibly grateful that I got to have that experience, because it made me like, I want to systematize as much of my life as I can, because I want to feel that ease and that flow and that kind of like frictionless movement more often. And so I guess really ever since then, and and it's been a slow process in getting there. That's how I've wanted to run my house, which back then was living with a partner, but now I'm living by myself. That's how I want my house to feel. I want to feel like everything has its place. And so when I am doing like household work, tidying up, doing laundry, doing dishes, even cooking, whatever the case may be, I want to feel like there is a system in place that I can just follow on autopilot. I don't know, there's this kind of, maybe this isn't true, but this is the impression I get, that like people who are less into, structuring things and organizing and stuff, I worry, I suppose, that as someone who is really interested in systematizing and organizing and structuring, whether it is a space or a process or your time, I worry that people think that I'm doing that because I enjoy that for the sake of it. Like I enjoy, almost like it's procrastination, like organizing the thing itself is to avoid doing the thing itself. But that's not the case with me. For me, I try to systematize it and I try to organize it because I don't like the stuff, and I just want to figure out, a good way, or maybe even the best way to do it, so that I can then just repeat that process and never think about it again. So for me, systematizing is like, yes, it takes time and energy up front, but that time and energy pays off when you can then just run with that system and not have to make the same decisions every single day. And I think when I want to talk about systems, when I want to talk about, I guess specifically systems for the mundane stuff, for the household things, domestic things, I worry that people will think that I am talking about it just because I'm interested in it for its own sake. I'm talking about housework, for instance, or how I go about housework, or a system for housework, because I enjoy housework. Yeah, I often have that fear that that's how I'm going to come across, as just someone who enjoys housework and mundane stuff and the domestic stuff, and that's why I'm talking about it. And so then that if you are someone who is, having a conversation with me or listening to me or watching one of my videos about something more mundane, that you're going to feel like that it doesn't apply to you because you don't like that stuff, or you don't enjoy it, or you don't have the best relationship with housework, or whatever the case may be. When in reality, the reason that I'm interested in systematizing the domestic and the mundane is because I don't enjoy it, or because I don't have a great relationship with it, or I haven't in the past. Again, I think I've said this already, but it's because I want to spend my energy thinking about my other pursuits, my creative work, my writing, my videos, whatever it might be that I'm working on, that I don't want to think about the domestic and the mundane more than it feels like it's worth it to think about. And that's the utility of the system, is think about it, a bit more in the beginning to set up the system, and then move forward on autopilot from there. But even as I'm saying that, I'm kind of arguing with myself, because I don't know, I feel like I do. So I haven't really made many videos I can think of off the top of my head, which are lifestyle content, I suppose, which deal with the more mundane or domestic or household areas of life, in the more tutorial sort of how-to type of videos, because obviously in my vlogs you are seeing a lot of my day-to-day kind of mundane stuff. Where am I going with this? Yeah, I haven't done a lot of that recently, but I did do a little bit more of it in the past. I do have a really old video on called How to Do Your Groceries, which is basically the system that I had figured out for myself for doing my grocery shop, because I hated doing groceries and it really stressed me out. And so I was trying out the system and I found that it was helping, and so I made a video about it. And even though I had the desire to share that, because I was like, this has helped me, maybe it'll help someone else, I did and still do have some discomfort with the idea of that being mixed in with everything else on my channel, which I know is a lot more freeform now than it used to be. It used to be just really about writing, and now, you know, it's a bit all over the place in terms of my interests and creativity and witchcraft and whatever else. But I did have some discomfort with the idea of being known as someone who makes like lifestyle content, because it has a connotation to it, for me and many people, of being shallow or trivial or like not the real important, interesting stuff that we want to talk about and think about. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that, of course, for, I was going to say millennia, but that seems like too long. For many, many years, the domestic domain has been seen as like women's work, as like the sphere of the domain of women, and has therefore been devalued and seen as not as important as the other types of work and creation and things we do as humans. That in some sense, even when you're talking about systems and systematizing the mundane parts of our lives and the domestic parts of our lives, that is in some way like women's work, and therefore just not as cool or interesting or worthwhile as other types of work. And that is an association that I feel like I have started to pull myself away from, but it still definitely has its grip in some instances or in some ways. But I would really like to challenge that even more, because I do think that the mundane, the domestic, the way that we go about managing our everyday lives is not women's work. It is the work of living. It is the work of being a human. At the end of the day, we as human beings need to eat, we need to manage our possessions, we want to wear clothes, and so therefore we need to clean them, we need to take care of ourselves and take care of our spaces. And that is not a female thing, that is a human thing. And all of that work, far from being trivial, is actually, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, that work is the stuff that needs to get done before we, like as a baseline kind of foundation for us to have our basic needs met, for us to then even, you know, begin to think about things beyond that, you know, creative pursuits, more intellectual pursuits. I'm also inspired by, and have been kind of thinking about again, this PBS Idea Channel video about, I think it's called Mesmerism and Morning Routines. I think for a lot of people, I don't know, it depends like what kind of house, what kind of space you grew up in, you know, like how the people around you organised things or didn't organise things. I did not grow up in a particularly organised household, and so everything was quite chaotic. And so it's been this process as I've, you know, grown up and grown and learned and changed and stuff, of like trying to find the systems, create organisational systems for myself. So I know what it feels like to not have that very well. And to me, so like the idea of, you know, living in a space where your possessions are just kind of in places, they don't have dedicated homes where they live, where you put them away to, makes tidying really difficult. Because at the end of the day, if you don't know where something is meant to go, like you've never decided that's where putting it away is, then tidying becomes like really stressful, at least for me. Because you're just kind of like moving things around and trying to decide where they're going to go for now. And that's how you end up with, you know, things like junk drawers, or like shoving everything under your bed like you're a kid, or like you do when you're a kid. It becomes really easy for things to become really chaotic and messy again, because your decisions are never kind of permanent as to where you're putting things. You're just kind of like clearing spaces and then shoving things places to get them out of the spaces that you want to be clear. And it's a similar thing with your time. So like, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about morning routines and stuff, and how just any area where you're having to make the same decisions over and over again, I just think is a bit of a waste of energy. So like in the morning, for instance, there's a bunch of things that I either feel like I have to do or that I want to do to get on with my day. I try to always make my bed in the morning, because it just feels better. It feels like if my bed isn't made, then it feels like I'm not properly up yet, which makes it feel like a sick day or like a day that I'm just going to spend in bed. So that one is actually pretty easy because that's usually the first thing I do. But you know, there's all the normal stuff. There's like getting some kind of caffeine for the day, tea or coffee, getting some breakfast, brushing my teeth, getting changed, doing my makeup, doing my hair, and anything else which I like want to add to that, maybe drawing a tarot card of the day, whatever it might be. And without a routine, I still want to do all of those things, except when I wake up, I'm faced with the decision of which order in which to do them, which I actually find incredibly stressful, because as Mike says in the PBS Idea Channel video on morning routines, which I will link below because it's really, really good. Like when you first wake up, there's this kind of inertia that you have to fight, or some of us do. Like immediately dumping a bunch of decisions about how to go about your morning on yourself after just waking up, I feel, personally at least, it's a recipe for disaster for me. Because I end up just like lying in bed kind of paralysed, trying to decide, well, like how am I going to do my morning then? And so for me, the reason I want to create a morning routine is to just have a template for the order in which I do those things so that I can do them on autopilot. And I can just get into the flow and the habit and the routine without having to think about it every single day, because you only have a finite amount of like decision-making energy and decision-making power for every day, and I don't want to be wasting it first thing every day on the menial stuff. I realise that I'm switching here between routines and systems for a space, you know, for a home or for a coffee shop, and routines and systems for like your time, so your morning or your day. So I guess I'm just interested in the idea of structure and system as like a container for creativity or for flow. Because I think for people who are a bit more resistant to the idea of structure and organisation and, you know, deciding things in advance and stuff, the impression that some people get is that a structure or a system for something, for doing something, it can feel like a prison. It feels like something which is like inhibiting your creativity because you just always want to go outside the bounds of your own rules or outside the bounds of the system, and you're like, well, if I can't just be free and flow or do whatever I feel like and be spontaneous, then how can I be creative? And I definitely think there's a balance to be struck. I don't think you can systematize every inch and every second of your life and your creative process, whatever it is that you do or make. I think there is such a thing as too much structure, too much rigidity. But I'm really interested in this idea of a system as a way of enabling flow, as a way of enabling creativity. And I guess that's in some ways how I see the plot embryo. It's a structure within which the creativity is in how you work with the moving parts of it, it's the ghost within the machine. It's the dance you do within the system that is the creative part. Yeah, and I think about that, the system that was in place in Avenue Coffee, and how that state of flow that I could get into, certainly not all the time, but sometimes, that felt so good to just be moving and just be completely present in the moment. That was entirely enabled by the system. That couldn't exist without that system. Because if it didn't exist, then I would constantly be thinking like, okay, where are the tea bags? What did I do with the teaspoons? And how should I go about this particular drink? Or how do I do this group of drinks together? If you're constantly having to make new versions of these decisions all the time, you can't get into that flow. So yeah, to wrap up what I was saying, or how I've been connecting this with the idea of how I run my house, or how I take care of the mundane and the domestic parts of my life. That is one reason, that's why I am such a big fan of the KonMari method of tidying and organising and kind of running your house. Because it systematizes things in a way that reduces your decision making in a huge way. But it does require that work up front of creating the system, so that once you've done that, you can just work within it and flow within it. And that is the process that I have been working on ever since I moved, really, because my system, I had a particular system in place when I lived with Ross, or we did together for that flat, and now I'm in a new place, and I've had to furnish it and everything, like furnish it and organise it, and I still feel like it's just not quite there. And if you watched my nearly done with folding the laundry, if you watched, I can't remember which Q&A it was, but one of them, I talked about household rituals and how I have always struggled with housework, just not enjoyed it, struggled to motivate myself to actually do it, even though I know that I really like being and living and working in a place that is organised and tidy. I know that, but I've always struggled to actually keep it that way. Really, in the last year that I was living with Ross, I felt like I finally found my flow with it. I'd finally gotten to the point where the place was organised enough, and I had like decorated it and stuff to the point where I liked being in the spaces, and I could finally do housework rituals which felt nice, or not necessarily fun, but like relaxing. And I could actually enjoy it because the systems were in place, so I could get into autopilot and I would be like listening to something interesting or listening to music, or just trying to do it kind of like mindfully, I guess, and like focus on the actual physical sensations of what I was doing. And I finally felt like I'd reached that in the old place, and I feel like I've been trying to get back to that ever since I moved. I'm not quite there yet, but it's starting to get there. It did help a lot when I reorganised my kitchen, because my kitchen is a lot smaller than what I'm used to, and so finding a flow for cooking has been difficult because I don't have the same kind of counter space to put the ingredients and to do chopping and all that kind of stuff. So I guess that's where my thoughts have mostly been, but I'm now looking in the direction of thinking about like, well, how does this relate to my writing and my making videos and other creative things that I do? How does the idea of a system and the flow I can create within that, how does that fit into writing or making videos? Making lessons for the Story Magic Academy, for instance. And I'm going through a system or a routine right now. Like the way that I fold my laundry, again, I use the KonMari method, which is why another reason I love it is that it systematizes things like this. I fold the different items in specific ways, and I start with tops, and then I move to other stuff, and then I finish up with socks and pants. It's just so much less stressful than it used to be. It's almost like mindful and mindless at the same time. Or it can be either, depending on what you want. I think it's very easy to think of the mundane work of living as something separate from creativity and the practice of creativity and flow in the creative realm and stuff. But everything is connected in our daily lives. The time that we sit down to work on our novel or painting or anything that you're making, that time happens within the context of a day where you're doing other things. And unless you are rich enough to outsource all of the mundane work of your life, if you have like an entire staff and a cleaner and someone who cooks for you and stuff like that, like you will be doing, some kinds of mundane work in and around the creative stuff as well. Yeah, so I've been reading this book called, is it Daily Rituals? And it's all about the daily routines of great minds. it's been really fascinating. I'd like to actually maybe do an entire video on some of the interesting parts of that and what I think about it. Like, a few of the things that have struck me from reading that is that, first of all, a lot of the greats, at least in certain sections of the book, were men who were well off and who did not do their own mundane work, who, had wives or staff who did all that stuff for them to like support their creativity, which I'm sure is not a new concept to anyone, but it was interesting to me to just see who those people were, and be like, oh right, okay, well it's maybe easier to be prolific when you have all that stuff taken care of. Another thing that struck me, which really melded very well with my experience, is that a lot of these, great creative minds didn't work like, your standard 9 to 5, like 8-hour work day. So many of them, had talked about like the kind of limits of what they could accomplish in a day. Just a few hours of writing in a day would be a good writing day. And the idea of what I describe as like my brain just tapping out for the day and just being like, I'm just mush, I'm making mistakes, and I can't think clearly, like my energy has just been used up for the day. And seeing that a lot of that for a lot of different creatives was a lot less than the 8-hour workday, and that a lot of them took big breaks in the middle of their days to go for walks, or to go for lunch and meet up with friends, or a lot of them drank a lot and took a lot of drugs and stuff as well. And how some creatives, and I can't remember where I read this or who it was. It's going to be really annoying. But I remember seeing someone talk about like how day jobs and other work that wasn't like, the one true creative work that they wanted to go after, supported that. Because something that I learned when I had a period of being funded by Creative Scotland to work on my novel, it was like a few months, and so I had the money, I was being paid to write, and that was my entire focus. And I actually put, I think, too much pressure on myself to do these really long writing days, because I was like, well, that's my job now. Finding that the spaces in between were really important. The time that it took me to commute or walk to wherever I was going to go to write instead of working from home, or time spent managing the other areas of my life were valuable decompression time. And I know also of other people who talk about mindless work or mundane work or systematized work being good for creativity, because it gives your mind a space to wander and to explore and to kind of churn over the things that you've been doing maybe in more serious, dedicated creative time. And I tried to deprive myself of that and just focus on actually creating for like, a period of months. And like I felt like every moment that I wasn't writing was like wasted time, and so I didn't spend a lot of time doing all the other kind of day-to-day stuff, and it didn't work. I really burned myself out, and it really got really difficult. So now I'm trying to find more of a balance, I suppose. Okay, I think I've rambled enough. But I'm interested to hear what you guys think. I know I've travelled a windy road in this video, but what do you think about systems, about flow, whether that is flow in a mundane setting, in a day job setting, or in, a one true creative pursuit setting? How do you think these things are related? And I'm interested to hear if you have any particular systems or routines which you feel like really support that, or support your creative endeavours that way. And lastly, if you like this video, I have 2 different things that you might be interested in. The first is that I have a free 7-day course on the plot embryo, which is a process for plotting an entire story on one page. It's the method that Dan Harmon uses, also called the story circle. I have a free 7-day course on that. You can find it at rachelstephen.com. And also at my website at rachelstephen.com, you can access my monthly live stream for $2 a month on Patreon, you can join in my monthly live stream. Sometimes we do kind of coffee ramble things like this. Sometimes we do writing sessions together, or Q&As. We change it up month to month, but they're always good fun as well. So maybe those things are of interest to you. Okay, Cinnamon Bun, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.